I was 3 weeks out of the hospital, still sleeping on my left side because my right shoulder hadn't fully healed, when my husband sat down across from me at the kitchen table and slid a manila envelope toward my coffee cup. He didn't say anything at first, just pushed it across the wood like he was passing me the salt. I remember staring at the envelope for a long moment. The morning light was coming through the window over the sink. I could hear our neighbor's lawnmower starting up outside. Everything felt completely ordinary. And then I opened it. Separation agreement. Effective immediately upon signature. My name is Alice Mercer. I'm 34 years old. And on the morning my husband handed me those papers, I had 17 staples in my shoulder from a surgery I'd had after a car accident. 6 weeks earlier, I was still doing physical therapy twice a week. I was still on modified duty at the elementary school where I worked as a speech therapist. I was, in every practical sense of the word, at my most vulnerable. I thought that was the worst moment of my life. I was wrong. My husband, I'll call him by his name, Garrett, and I had been married for 9 years. We met in our mid-20s at a mutual friend's birthday party in Columbus, Ohio. He was finishing his MBA. I had just started my job at the school district. We were the kind of couple that other people described as solid, steady, the ones who showed up to things on time and remembered anniversaries and didn't fight loudly in parking lots. We weren't perfect. No marriage is. We went through a rough patch in year 4 when he lost his job, and I carried us for almost 8 months on my salary alone. We disagreed about having kids. I wanted them sooner. He kept saying, "Give it 1 more year." We had arguments that stretched into silences that sometimes lasted longer than they should have. But I never, not once, believed we were heading here. Looking back now, I can pinpoint exactly when things shifted. It was mid-October, about 2 months before the accident. Garrett started coming home later than usual. Not dramatically late. 30 minutes, sometimes an hour. He started taking calls in the garage. He stopped telling me about his day in that easy, rambling way he used to. When I asked questions, he answered them. He just stopped volunteering anything. I noticed. Of course I noticed. But I told myself it was work stress. His company had recently gone through a round of layoffs, and his department had been restructured. I thought he was scared and didn't want to worry me. That was the story I told myself, because the alternative didn't feel possible. Then in December, I was driving back from a grocery run when a truck ran a red light and hit the passenger side of my car. My shoulder took the worst of it. I spent 2 nights in the hospital, had surgery on the rotator cuff, and came home to a house where my husband was suddenly completely present again. He cooked for me. He drove me to every appointment. He helped me wash my hair when I couldn't lift my arm above my shoulder. For about 3 weeks, I thought the accident had shaken something loose in him. Like the fear of losing me had pulled him back. And then the envelope appeared on the kitchen table. I sat there reading the same paragraph 4 times before I could make sense of it. Legal language, irreconcilable differences, division of assets. My fingers went cold. Garrett. My voice came out quieter than I intended. "What is this?" He was standing by the counter. He wouldn't look at me. "I think you know what it is." "I don't." I set the papers down. "I genuinely don't. I need you to explain this to me like a person." He said something about growing apart, about wanting different things, about how he'd been unhappy for a long time and hadn't known how to say it. The words came out smoothly, like he'd rehearsed them, and that smoothness made me feel more sick than anything else. I asked if there was someone else. He said no, firmly. Immediately. I asked if it was about money. He said no. I asked if he'd been talking to a lawyer before this, without telling me. He said he just wanted to protect both of us. I didn't say anything after that. I think I was in shock. You can't really prepare for the moment when the person you've built your entire adult life with looks at you across a kitchen table and tells you, it's over, even when something inside you has been whispering it for weeks. I spent the next 6 weeks in a kind of fog. I was still recovering physically, still doing PT, still trying to manage my caseload at work from home 2 days a week, and underneath all of that, I was trying to figure out what had happened to my marriage. I talked to friends. I talked to a therapist. I went through every conversation, every silence, every moment I'd felt something was off, trying to find the thing I'd missed. I found nothing. No evidence of an affair. No financial red flags I could see. No explanation that made any kind of sense. Garrett had moved into the guest bedroom. We lived in a kind of polite, excruciating parallel for those weeks, sharing coffee in the morning, passing each other in the hallway, speaking only about logistics. He was still kind to me, in a removed way, which almost made it worse. My mother-in-law reached out once during that time. We'd always gotten along reasonably well, or so I'd believed. She called to say she was sorry about what I was going through, and that she hoped things would work out. She sounded formal, like she was reading from a card. I thanked her and we hung up. I didn't hear from her again. The mediation session was scheduled for a Thursday morning in February. Not a courtroom. A conference room on the 4th floor of a building downtown, with gray carpet and a window that looked out over a parking structure. Our mediator was a retired family law judge named Mr. Hargrove. He had kind eyes and the measured, patient voice of someone who had sat in rooms like this hundreds of times. I sat on one side of the table with my attorney. Garrett sat across from me with his. There was a carafe of water in the center. Nobody poured any. The session was supposed to cover the initial terms: asset division, the house, the joint accounts. Garrett and I had no children, which made certain things simpler on paper, though nothing about it felt simple. About 40 minutes in, we'd reached an impasse over the house. Garrett wanted to sell immediately and split the proceeds. I wanted to stay through the end of the school year, maybe longer, to give myself time to stabilize financially while I was still limited in the hours I could work. My attorney was making the case for a delayed sale when Garrett's phone buzzed on the table. He looked at it. Something crossed his face. I couldn't read it exactly. He silenced the phone and looked back at Mr. Hargrove. 10 minutes later, the door to the conference room opened. I thought it was an assistant at first. But when I turned, I saw it was my brother-in-law. Garrett's younger brother, Tommy. He was 29, the quieter of the two of them, the one who showed up at Thanksgiving and helped with the dishes without being asked. I had always liked him. He looked terrible. His face was gray, his jaw was set, and he was carrying a file folder pressed against his chest like it contained something radioactive. Garrett shot to his feet. "Tommy, what are you doing here? How did you even?" "I called his office," Tommy said, looking at my attorney. "They told me where the session was." He didn't look at Garrett when he said this. Garrett's attorney stood up. "Excuse me, this is a private. I know what it is." Tommy's voice was very quiet, very controlled. "I need 5 minutes. What I have to say affects this proceeding directly." Mr. Hargrove held up a hand. He looked at both attorneys, then at me, then at Garrett. "I'll allow it," he said. 5 minutes. Garrett was shaking his head. "Tommy, I am asking you. I know what you're asking." Tommy finally looked at his brother. There was something in his expression I'd never seen on his face before. Not anger exactly. Something more like grief that had curdled into resolve. "I'm sorry, Garrett. I can't." He sat down at the end of the table and opened the folder. What he put on the table were bank statements, financial records, a series of printed emails, and a letter, handwritten, that I would later learn he'd found in their mother's home office 3 weeks earlier. Tommy spoke for the next 12 minutes. Nobody stopped him. He explained that 8 months ago, he had noticed unusual activity in the accounts tied to his and Garrett's family business, a regional commercial landscaping company that their father had built over 30 years and left to both of them when he passed away 4 years ago. The business wasn't large, but it was profitable, and both brothers had financial interests in it, even though Garrett managed the day-to-day operations, and Tommy largely stayed hands-off. The unusual activity was a pattern of transfers, small amounts at first. A few $100s moved into accounts Tommy didn't recognize. Then larger ones. Recurring. Systematic. He'd hired an accountant to look at the records independently. The transfers totaled just over $380,000 over a period of roughly 2 years. the accounts they'd been transferred into belonged to their mother. The room was silent for a long time after Tommy said the number. I looked at Garrett. He had his elbows on the table and his face in his hands. My attorney spoke first. "Are you alleging that, Mrs.?" "I'm not alleging anything," Tommy said. "These are account records, subpoenaed by an independent forensic accountant." He slid the documents across to Mr. Hargrove. "She's been pulling from the business accounts systematically since right after Dad died. She had signature authority on 2 of the older accounts that nobody thought to audit because they hadn't been active in years." I could hear the ventilation system in the ceiling. That's how quiet the room was. "Garrett knew," Tommy said quietly. "He found out about 11 months ago." I turned to look at my husband. He still hadn't lifted his face. "Garrett." My voice didn't sound like my own. "Is that true?" He didn't answer immediately. Then he straightened up, and when he looked at me, his eyes were red, not from crying, from holding something in for a very long time. "I found the first discrepancy by accident," he said. "I was doing a routine review for tax season. I thought it was a bookkeeping error." He stopped. "It wasn't." "When did you know it was her?" I asked. "March of last year." "March. That was 7 months before the accident. 8 months before the envelope on the kitchen table. Why didn't you tell me?" The question came out flat, not angry, because I was still trying to put it together, still trying to understand the shape of what I was looking at. Garrett looked down at the table. "Because I didn't know what to do. She's my mother," I thought. I kept thinking I could fix it quietly. Get her to stop, maybe find a way to repay the business without making it a legal matter. He shook his head. "Every time I confronted her, she cried. She said she'd done it for the family. She said Dad had promised her certain things before he died that weren't in the will. She kept saying she deserved it." "And the separation papers," I said. He closed his eyes. Tommy answered before Garrett could. "Mom told him that if the investigation became public and there were criminal charges, the business would be under scrutiny for months, maybe years. She told him that being married to the person managing the business accounts would put you in a complicated position legally." Tommy's voice was careful, measured. "She said separating from you would protect you from the fallout." I sat with that for a moment. "She told him to divorce me," I said. "To protect me from a mess she made." "Yes," Tommy said. I looked at Garrett. "And you believed her?" "I was trying to." He stopped. Started again. "I thought if I could keep you out of it completely, it would be better for you." I wasn't thinking clearly. I know that now. I know how it sounds. "It sounds," I said slowly, "like you made a decision about my life without asking me." He didn't answer. There wasn't anything to say. Mr. Hargrove reviewed the documents quietly for several minutes. His expression was unreadable in the way of someone who has learned to keep their reactions out of their face professionally. When he looked up, he addressed both attorneys. "Given this new information, I'm recommending we pause today's session. These documents need to be reviewed by counsel and potentially referred to the appropriate authorities." He looked at Garrett. "I'd also strongly suggest that both parties consult independently about how this new context affects the stated grounds for this proceeding." Garrett's attorney was already making notes. Mine leaned over and said something quietly in my ear. I nodded. I wasn't really listening. I was thinking about the phone call I'd gotten from my mother-in-law the month after the accident. The formal, card-reading quality of her voice. The way she'd said she hoped things would work out. As if she hadn't been the one setting them in motion. We broke 20 minutes later. The hallway outside the conference room was beige and carpeted and completely impersonal. Garrett and Tommy and I stood there while the attorneys dealt with paperwork inside. Tommy looked exhausted. He'd been carrying this, I realized, for weeks, maybe longer. "Why now?" I asked him. He looked at me. "Because I found the letter 3 weeks ago, and because when I read it, I understood what she'd actually done." He paused. She wasn't just taking from the business. She'd coached him. Told him exactly what to say to make the separation seem like his idea. Like a mutual, reasonable thing. His jaw tightened. "I'm not okay with being part of a family that does things like that." I looked at Garrett. He was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, staring at the floor. He looked like someone who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and had just been told he could put it down. Except the putting down didn't feel like relief. It felt like devastation. "I'm still angry," I said. "Not to Tommy. To Garrett." He nodded without looking up. "I'm angry that you didn't trust me. I'm angry that you let her convince you I needed to be managed instead of told the truth. I'm angry that I spent 6 weeks thinking it was something I'd done, or something I'd failed to be." My shoulder ached, which it still did, sometimes in the cold. I was recovering from surgery. I was trying to figure out what I'd done wrong. And the whole time, "I know." His voice broke slightly. "I know. You don't get to decide what I can handle. You're right." He finally looked up. His eyes were wet. "You are completely right. I'm sorry, Alice. I handled every part of this wrong. All of it." We didn't reconcile in that hallway. That's not how it works, not in real life. There was no moment where I melted and forgave him because he looked sad enough. I went home to the house we were supposedly selling, and I sat with everything for a long time. Over the following weeks, the pieces settled into place the way they do when you're finally seeing the full picture after months of partial information. Garrett retained his own attorney to deal with the business side. His mother was eventually referred to a county prosecutor. The forensic accountant's report was filed. It was a long, slow, unglamorous process that involved a lot of phone calls and paperwork, and nothing resembling the dramatic justice you see in movies. She was charged. The process took the better part of a year. I won't say more about the outcome than that she faced real legal consequences. Because she did. And that matters. But I also won't pretend it felt like closure in the way I expected. It felt more like a door finally closing on something that had been left open too long. Garrett and I paused the separation. That's the most accurate way to put it. We paused it. We didn't immediately go back to the way things were, because the way things were included him carrying a secret for the better part of a year that ate through the foundation of what we'd built. Trust doesn't just reassemble itself because the reason for the breach turned out to be complicated. It has to be rebuilt, slowly, in real time, through small choices made consistently over months. We started therapy. Not couples therapy at first. Individual therapy, both of us, separately. Learning to say the things we hadn't been saying. Learning, in his case, that protecting someone and trusting them are not the same thing. Learning, in mine, that I had spent years making myself easier to manage by not pushing harder when I sensed something was wrong. It's slow work, necessary work. There are still mornings when I sit at the same kitchen table where he handed me that envelope, and something in me goes quiet and careful. There are still moments when he says he'll handle something, and I have to actively remind myself that handling things is not the same as hiding things, and that the version of him who made those choices is not the whole person sitting across from me. But we chose to stay. We chose it consciously. After everything was on the table, and there were no more missing pieces, and we could finally see each other clearly. That's different from staying because you don't know better. That's different from staying because you're afraid. We stayed because when we finally looked at each other with nothing hidden between us, we still wanted to be there. Tommy came over for dinner a few weeks after the mediation session. He brought a bottle of wine and a slightly awkward energy, and we sat at the table and talked for 3 hours about everything except what had happened. Near the end of the night, while Garrett was doing the dishes, Tommy looked across the table at me and said, "I'm glad you didn't sign." "Me too," I said. He nodded. Then he said, "For what it's worth, I think she convinced herself she was protecting him too. I think she genuinely believed she was managing a crisis." He paused. "That doesn't make it okay. But I think it's true." I thought about that for a long time after he left. The idea of someone doing damage on a profound scale while believing, fully, that they were helping. The way love can get so tangled up with control that the person doing it can't see the difference anymore. I don't have a clean conclusion to offer about forgiveness or moving on or the lessons I've learned. Life doesn't really arrange itself into lessons. What I have is this. A marriage that almost ended not because of a failure of love, but because of a failure of honesty, and a choice made in a beige hallway on a February afternoon to find out whether honesty was something we could still build back together. Most days I think we can. And on the days I'm not sure. I remember Tommy walking into that conference room with a folder pressed to his chest, looking like a man who had decided that telling the truth was more important than keeping the peace. And I think about how close I came to signing my name on a document in a gray carpeted room, not knowing that the real story was still out there, waiting for someone brave enough to bring it in. The truth didn't save my marriage on its own, but it gave us the only real chance we ever had.